is so big that even from the top of Ben Lomond, it's hard to see it as a whole. Today I'm in for a great treat. I'm going up in a hot air balloon any second now. Well, it's a mighty big balloon, John. I had no idea they were so big.
It's 77,000 cubic feet. It's about 80 feet high and 50 feet across.
And this wee basket that we're in, I'm surprised it's so small with these big cylinders.
Well, it's comfortable enough, isn't it?
The thing that puzzles me is, you know, when you were blowing it up, it went up so quickly. And then there was a certain point when the basket lifted off the ground with real dynamism. And every time you turn that wee key, something happens. What actually happens?
Well, that's a valve letting the propane through, and then that catches light with the pilot light. And that's producing something like the equivalent of 800 gas ovens full on, about 14 or 15 million BTHUs. So that'll power us up into the sky pretty quickly.
So it's the heat of the air inside that keeps the balloon up?
That's right, that's right. Well, we're running the balloon at the moment about 100 degrees centigrade inside, and it's, what, about 17, 18 degrees centigrade outside. So that gives us, what, 80, 83 degrees difference. And that's enough. The difference in density is enough to lift us up. And all we're doing is we're just riding a bubble of hot air. We've trapped the hot air in a nylon bag, and we're just hanging on underneath.
And as it cools down, you're giving it a wee boost to keep it up? That's
right. Otherwise, if it cools down, we start going down.
Now steering. There's no steering wheel in the balloon. How do you get to your course?
Well, we only go downwind. We don't have a choice. We just go with the wind. But we could be a bit more scientific than that, because at different altitudes, the wind's going in different levels. So today, if we stay low, we'd probably cross Loch Lomond. If we go high, then we go right up Loch Lomond, because the wind's from the south at 2,000 feet. So by adjusting our altitude between 2,000 feet and a couple of hundred feet, we can either cross Loch Lomond or go right up it.
So you are reading the clouds and the general shape of the landscape?
That's right. The wind will, much like water, it'll funnel between the mountains, and it'll, of course, carry us with us.
How many hours have you been spending ballooning in your life, John?
I've got about 12 or 1,300 hours. I've been flying for nearly 12 years now, and had a few moments of excitement, but the great thing about ballooning is every flight is different. You never know where you're going, and so it always retains that freshness, and that's why it's kept my interest over the years.
Well, I'll tell you why I feel safe in this balloon, because you built it yourself.
That's right. I was working as a balloon manufacturer a few years ago, and this was my goodbye present when I left. And we had a team of seamstresses and welders and basket makers, but I designed the balloon, and I think it's a good one, and it's certainly proved its worth over the last few years.
That's Balmaha Bay, and what a nice wee horseshoe shape it appears from this position, with Conic Hill forming the ridge of the Highland boundary fault. To Loch Lomond lovers, Balmaha has always been a magic name, the place to hire a boat and go fishing, or launch a canoe to explore the islands. Under Ben Lomond, the loch is over 600 feet below sea level, where the moving glaciers were compressed by the hard rocks, so they had to bulldoze deeply, and the loch couldn't spread out until it met the softer rocks. The wild eastern shore hasn't a road on it, only a path called the West Highland Way. From the swinging basket, you only have to turn your head to take in the full sweep of the scenery, the River Endrick coming in and the islands close by. This is a really spectacular way of seeing Loch Lomond, and very different from the more conventional way I first got to know it. I would be about 15 when I first met the backpackers, men who travelled light and came to terms with nature as they found it. They're not youngsters now, but they're still enjoying the loch in the old, simple way. There's something magical about a fire, and my earliest memory of Loch Lomond is coming down the loch in the evenings after a day on the bike, and everywhere along the loch shore were the fires of men like myself, who'd been out from Glasgow, getting as far north as Tarbert, even further, and then coming down at night, lighting up, and then heading back. Well, that was in the 30s. That was the great era, the beginning of the outdoor movement, for me. But long before my time, in a wood just to the outskirts of Mulgai, Cregalion Woods, there was a fire which had become a kind of magnet for the people who were really determined to explore Scotland. And some of these men were legendary names to me. One was Jock Nimlin. He was a great climber of his day. And other folk used to talk to me about Bob Grieve. They were both Maryhill men. And they're with me now, here on Loch Lomond side, to talk about the old days. I wonder if anybody remembers the fire now, Jock.
No, it's very unlikely. People wandering along past Cregalion Loch today would just see an empty track. But way back then in the 20s, late 20s and early 30s, on a Sunday night you would find anything up to 30 people sitting around this campfire just beside the track at Cregalion. And it's hard to believe that those things happened when you see it nowadays.
Can you remember the song that they used to sing?
Long may old Cregalion woods send forth abundance of her goods. May the fire be always lit so that we may come and sit.
Well, you were away pretty well every weekend in these days.
There was a period when I didn't miss a weekend in 5 years, in all kinds of weather, every time of year and every season. And I couldn't stay at home. The only reason for staying at home would have been illness. And I was very fit in those days. I got fit just going away at weekends. In fact, with that kind of life, climbing every weekend and climbing in all your holidays, you got marvelously fit. I don't think there's an exercise that could beat it for exercising practically every muscle in your body, especially if you do rock climbing and snow climbing.
And you worked in a shop till late on a Saturday night?
Yes.
So you would get to Balmahab at midnight?
If you were lucky. Sometimes you missed the last bus at Canisburn Toll, and then you had to walk over the Stocky Muir through the night. That was a common occurrence. And also, of course, if you had had a strenuous weekend, say in Ben Lomond, and you got back on a Sunday night to Balmaha and had missed the last bus, you had to walk again over the Stocky Muir Road, so back into Glasgow.
You got very little sleep then that weekend?
You got very little sleep indeed.
Oh, in the late 20s, you would be about 16.
Yeah.
You were working as an apprentice in Glasgow, but you had found Loch Lomond, indeed, you'd yourself wrapped up in a ground sheet in the boat shed at Balmaha, marked Grieve, Maryhill.
That's right.
You must have been here a great deal.
A lot, almost every weekend, yeah. Either on the islands or on the mountains, you know.
And then when you finished your apprenticeship, you were unemployed.
Correct.
What happened then?
Well, naturally, I took to areas like this, you know. I mean, what was the point of hanging about street corners? I only went back to sign on at what was popularly known as the Baroo. And in between times, I tended to be here, sleeping in the shores, like this, beside a fire, you know, an old ground sheet and a blanket bag made out of a blanket sewed up, stuffed with Glasgow Heralds.
And your ambition then was to be a good tramp.
A successful philosophical tramp, yes, that's right, yes. I had other aspirations, you see. Had to be philosophical.
And it was then you became interested in the environment.
Yes, you see, I was then serving an apprenticeship as a civil engineer, and I had a whole lot of cognate subjects I had to study, like geology. And it was, you know, I saw the thing in action here. Slowly, the dawn of understanding. Why the mountains? What caused the loch? And the shapes of the mountains? And why the islands were there? And, you know, that kind of thing. Even making a fire, you realised the whole range of movements that had created a tree. And here I was burning it. The end of one cycle and the ashes were the beginning of the other. I mean, this was the kind of thing that you began to understand on the ground, that kind of thing.
And this led you towards your life's work.
That's correct, there's no doubt about it. I mean, looking back, I'm absolutely clear about that.
And in your time, you've been the Chief Technical Planner for Scotland.
Yes.
You've been the Chairman of the Highlands and Islands Development Board.
Yeah.
You're now Professor Sir Robert Grieve, retired, but the President of the Friends of Loch Lomond, a society dedicated to seeing that the right things happen in Loch Lomond and to fight the things that you feel will irreparably damage Loch Lomond.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I suppose you become kind of anonymous in a job like that. You become a kind of super bureaucrat, so to speak. But I feel now at my age and with all the background of all this, that, you know, as a person, I feel I have to come out in the open and sort of take a position on this, Tom. You know, we've discussed this. And to make the point that it is so unique that it requires very special handling. I mean, damn it, we've done so much damage in the past. Let's not do it again.
And these days, Jock, you travelled very light. You didn't even carry a blanket.
We didn't carry a blanket. We didn't operate from a fixed base. If we were on holiday, for example, we just carried all our gear in our rucksack. We travelled as lightly as we possibly could. We just carried food. We carried plenty of food and a change of clothing, a spare sweater. And that was about all you carried. And when you settled down at night, you just stuck your feet into your pack. It wasn't a rucksack in those days, it was a knapsack, old army stock. And you pulled on an extra sweater, and you were quite happy. You always kept a fire going at night.
And you started the first working man's mountaineering club about when was it? 1930?
1930, we started a club called the Ptarmigan. We didn't call it after the shoulder of Ben Lomond, which is known as Ptarmigan. We called it after the bird, the ptarmigan, because we kept running into this little bird up in the mountain tops in the wildest of weather. And we admired the ptarmigan, and we called the club the Ptarmigan.
And you made friends with the people on the other side of the mountain. Tell me about the bugle.
Oh, yes.
That became a legend.
We made friends with, yes, this was a shepherd who lived in Glendew, on the north side of Ben Lomond. And one of our party, Bill Dugan, had a bugle. And we were very friendly with the shepherd's wife. And the idea was that when we were going down the north corrie of the Ben, Bill would blow this bugle. And they could hear it nearly 3,000 feet below us. And Mrs. Campbell would know we were coming down the corrie. She would get out the girdle, get the scones going and the pancakes, and have a big pot of tea ready for us when we get down. It was marvellous.
Bob Grieve wrote the greater part of this book, the Clyde Valley Regional Plan, in 1946. It was a vision of a more leisured future for urban living folk who would need the countryside more and more.
The whole thing about Loch Lomond in that book was to demonstrate, and in fact for all the countryside round Glasgow, that we had made one hell of a mess of a place like Clydeside, and of Glasgow, which had been a beautiful little city in the 18th century. Were we going to do the same thing with Loch Lomond? I mean, if you looked at some of the Italian lakes, built from end to end, Only in a sense are they elevated because of the climate. Here you could wreck this place, you know. In 10 years you could have wrecked it. The whole southern end of Loch Lomond there was actually zoned for bungalows at 4 to the acre, where you live, Gartaharn, from Balloch right along to Drimmen. This is what we were afraid of, and of speculative building up the loch, up that beautiful west side there, dotted away up the east side to Rowerdennen. Quite easily could have been like that. And this plan was to show why it should not be and how the thing should be organised and planned to keep this as a superb piece of Highland wilderness, in a sense.
And now, after 30 years of neglect of that plan, we're coming back to it again.
Yes, in a sense, although I must say, you know, one has to say that the planning machine, by and large, has preserved a lot of Loch Lomond. It preserved the south end there. It stopped the whole idea of development there. But there's enough bad things have been done to make you worry. Let's put it that way.
And to you, it's still a miraculous place.
To me, it's unbeatable. It's the nearest thing to perfection, I would say. It's a masterpiece, like a great painting. And it's something that I would hate to see damaged in any way, just as I would hate to see a great painting damaged. And that is always the danger with modern developments. Somebody building a new straight road somewhere, or a pipeline down a hillside. To me, that's like somebody ripping a marvellous canvas.
A marvellous old tree, probably about 200, 250 years old. But that isn't the tree of Loch Lomond. The tree of Loch Lomond is the oak. And these particular oaks were probably planted by Robert the Bruce in the 14th century, at least the original trees, the descendants. And over on the island of Inchlonig are the other trees that Bruce planted, the yew tree for his bowmen. And they were probably used at the Battle of Bannockburn. And that makes you think. There is a feeling in this particular kind of place in Loch Lomond that you're the first person that's ever been there. And no matter how busy the season is, you can always find peace. But early in the year, before the tourists come, this is the beginning of April, that feeling is intensified. And yet, although you may think you've got it to yourself, very often you find another self-seeker has come for the same thing that you're looking for, especially to this particular bay, because this bay not only looks upon Ben Lomond, suddenly it's there beyond the Narrows between two islands, but it's a great place to light a wee fire and have a drum up with that view in front of you. But William Wordsworth thought Loch Lomond didn't compare with his own beloved Lakeland because the hills were too high and the loch too wide. Retired shipwright Jimmy Kerr can't stay away from Loch Lomond. Could you say, Jimmy, you've seen a terrific increase in the use of Loch Lomond in the time you've known it?
Oh, absolutely, Tom. Yes, because in my younger days, Tom, the motor car was pretty much in its infancy. And when I was a boy, the only people that owned motor cars were, say, maybe like professional people, doctors or a lawyer. There were no working people owned a motor car. So you can imagine now, the motor car has opened up Loch Lomond to a tremendous amount of people. I mean, all types of people. Now, they can come along these roads there with a little trailer and their boat, throw them into the loch, and then they're away again, maybe the same night or maybe over a weekend. Oh, the loch has been developed quite a bit regarding people. But as a point I'm always making now is, the loch basically is unchanged since the glacier age. It's still the same loch. I mean, looking around where we are just now, there's no sign of mankind or habitation whatsoever, nothing in sight at all.
Don't you think the whole of Loch Lomond should be one big national park and planned so that it's planned for conservation and development restricted?
Well, Tom, you would think that in a broad statement would be correct, but you've got to admit that the people who own Loch Lomond and its environment have kept it pretty good themselves, have they not?
Jimmy, I think one of the weaknesses of Loch Lomond is the fact that there is no agency for overall planning. That's
No.
to say, the west side of the loch is Dumbartonshire, the
Yes.
east side is Stirlingshire,
That's right.
and it's very, very hard to coordinate things.
Well, that's true, Tom. But you were talking about government control.
National park. I had
A
one.
national park. Well, in theory, it looks very nice. But I would say if Loch Lomond is left, even under the present ownership, I think it would be a very good idea, because it's been good for 1,000 years, and I think it's still good to carry on. Because once you bring government ownership into anything, you get a bureaucracy, you get people, officials, who more or less wield the iron sword. It's like Nazi Germany, National Socialism. I've met rangers in the Forestry Commission that more or less virtually ran me off at the threat of the jail. Now, they are public servants, but to me, I was a criminal because I was on their property, which is the nation's property. The government are harder taskmasters regarding property in the private owner. You've got more sympathy from a laird than you get from a government department. Once you get that broad arrow, beware, beware.
There's a point in what you say.
See what I'm getting at?
Aye.
Now, I'll be quite happy if this area, the whole of Loch Lomond, is kept more or less on the same basis. Let people enjoy it, let people look after it, and I don't think we'll have any conflict between ownership and public people enjoying it.
Right, let's have a sail through the Narrows, Jimmy. I'd
What,
love
you go
to
through
do
the
that.
Narrows,
Yes.
up the Amazon?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely, Tom, very good.
Real old sourdoughs, such as the men we've been talking to, have been enjoying Loch Lomond since their teenage days, and they're still doing so. In return, however, they have made themselves protectors of Loch Lomond. Maybe you think it's wrong to light a fire. Not so if you choose a safe place, and thoroughly douse the fire afterwards so that nobody knows you've been there. But there's nothing precise about a hot air balloon, and I'm just wondering where we're going to hit the ground and how hard.
Downwind, Tom, downwind.
But where, I'm saying, where?
Somewhere downwind, that's as close as I'll predict. I'll tell you just shortly after we've landed.
So you've got to be pretty decisive then in this balloon.
Well, we can land along the line which we're flying. Now, we can decide along that line whereabouts we land. So we'll let it down, hopefully not into trees and not into the water, but somewhere which is a fairly open spot so we can get down safely.
Well, I'll tell you this, it's going to be exciting for me to see where we do land, because the land's getting very close.
Okay, Tom, this looks like it's the landing coming up now. We'll get in just on the edge of this brow here. Now, remember what I told you, hold these rope handles and don't get out of the basket. Now, it's going to be a fairly fast one, this, and we will hit the ground fairly hard. So just hang on in and don't get out till I tell you, okay?
So this is the controlled
This
accident.
is going to
that
be
you
a
told me
controlled
about.
accident, Tom.
Well, it's coming up.
Okay.